Hello class, my name is Taniqua Williams and welcome to my presentation on the interpersonal deception theory. I will begin by giving you an overview of the theory. So the first thing we'll discuss is what is interpersonal deception theory? Where did it come from? The assumptions associated with the theory, context and relationship, interactivity, bias and suspicion, and accuracy of judgment will be the final thing that we discuss. When I think about the word interpersonal, I automatically think of warm, happy, meaningful, and personal relationships with those people nearest and dearest to my heart. Whether it be a relationship that I have with my spouse, my daughters, my parents, or close friends, I associate the word interpersonal with good feelings. On the other hand, when I think about the word deception, my mind automatically goes in the other direction. A place that's not so warm and fuzzy, and I can't understand the thought of anyone ever being deceptive in their communication with me. Why would there be a need to leave out pertinent information or falsify details in order to communicate in any relationship? Now, I know you and I are all Christians and that deception is not a part of our vocabulary, so this theory wouldn't apply to many of us. But for the few of us that it does apply to, let me elaborate a little bit more. Deception involves the deliberate manipulation of information, behavior, and image in order to lead another person to a false belief or conclusion. Typically, when a speaker deceives someone, that person engages in strategic behavior that distorts the truthfulness of information or conveys incomplete, irrelevant, unclear, and indirect information. And that comes from Littlejohn and Foss, 2011, page 189. In order for us to fully understand the complexities involved in interpersonal deception theory, one must examine all of the surrounding factors that play a part in shaping one's perspective, thus leading to the type of behavior that one exhibits while engaging in an act of interpersonal deception. Interpersonal deception theory, also known as IDT, is one contemporary communication theory intended to predict and explain deception in the context of interpersonal interaction. Which brings me to my next point. Where did it come from? IDT was developed by David Buehler and Judy K. Burgoon to offer an alternative perspective to prevailing psychological perspectives on deception. Growing out of several decades of research into credibility and interpersonal communication, it is an interrelated set of assumptions and propositions or testable statements drawing on principles of interpersonal communication to predict and explain deception in interpersonal interactions. Its scope is thus deception during communication, which can include face-to-face, public, computer-mediated, or virtual communication. To date, there have been over 20 experiments and have conducted various testings of IDT. Many but not all have received support. And IDT is not meant to focus on a single cause, but instead to provide a comprehensive depiction of communication relevant factors in deception messages, productions, and deception detection, which can lead to different assumptions, bringing me to my next point of IDT. Assumptions. Assumptions are the given in a theory that underpin it but are not tested. It assumes first that interpersonal interactions place all parties in the simultaneous role of sender and receiver. A central assumption regarding deception is the sizing up of the credibility of other communicators in an inherent part of all interaction. Even though it typically occurs as a subconscious level, gauging another's truthfulness in its implicit part of all human encounters. Another key assumption in deception entails three classes of strategic, deliberate activity, information, behavior, and image management. Handled skillfully, these three classes of strategic activity should work together to create an overall believable communication performance. At the same time, other non-strategic or unintentional may also occur, producing unnatural behavior, damaging performances, and undermining credibility. A related assumption is that deception is more cognitively demanding than truth-telling. As you can see from the interpersonal deception theory, is that meaning should take everything into context, which brings me to my next point of context and relationships. There are two central propositions when dealing with relationships: the deceiver and the deceiver's thoughts, feeling that behaviors are very systematically with access to nonverbal cues and conversational demands. And the second thing is deceiver and receiver thoughts, feelings, and behaviors vary systematically with relationship familiarity and relational valence. The context of relationship affect the way people communicate. In context, if we are talking face to face, I may react differently versus responding to someone via an email. Reason being, I don't have all the context in the written email that I may have when I engage with someone in person. So there might not be as much interactivity needed, which is another important piece of IDT, interactivity. This proposition is more that the interactivity of communication context, the more the deceivers increase strategic activity and reduce non-strategic activity, over time draws on the factor of nonverbal cues, access, and assumptions about interaction and dynamics, strategic activity, and the cognitive demands of deception messages production. Interactive communication contexts typically include more nonverbal channels through which communicators are interdependent and will therefore motivate senders to exert more control over their verbal and nonverbal behavior so as to evade the detection. Conversely, less interactive contexts such as email exchanges will take fewer demands on senders to manage so many different facets of behavior in real time and thus entail less motivation to manage information, behavior, and imaging. So depending on the type of interactions, whether it be with a close friend or with the family or an enemy, one could also form this type of bias, which is another topic that we can delve into, which is bias and suspicion. So suspicion and truth bias are expected to influence receiver judgments. Truth bias makes us less inclined to deception. Example, married couples may not pay as close of attention to cues because they automatically assume that there's a mutual truth amongst the relationship. So 9 times out of 10, when my husband comes to me and he tells me something, I believe what he says. Now, that may be a mistake on my behalf because when he is not truthful, it can lead to a lie bias, which is what happens when truth bias is compromised. In a lie bias, we accentuate our suspicions, thus causing one to be suspicious of everything. Now, can you imagine being in a relationship with someone who is always suspicious? Wouldn't that just drive you up the wall? For example, one proposition states that receivers will manifest their suspicions through strategic and non-strategic behavior. They may choose a questioning style that either makes their suspicions evident of attempts to minimize any signs of skepticism. At the same time, the incredibility may leak or unintentionally in their demeanor, tipping off the sender to presence of suspicion. So how can we tell when we are being deceived? There are 9 accuracy of judgment propositions developed to help us with this. So are humans accurate at judgment of deception? Research shows that receivers are less accurate in detecting deception when receivers hold a truth bias or their contexts are interactive and senders are skilled encoders. Receivers are more accurate when they are familiar with the deceiver, when they are skilled decoders, or when senders deviate from expected patterns. So by now you should have a good grasp on the interpersonal deception theory, which brings me to my conclusion. So a recap of the interpersonal deception theory was developed as an alternative to psychological perspectives on deception. IDT was formed out of decades of research with over 20 experiments leading to its findings. And so we should all take this lesson and be more cognizant of our interpersonal relationships in order to avoid deception. Remember to follow the golden rule and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. As we continue to grow and learn through life experiences, we must be mindful to not only our views but to the views of others, and being a living example of the old saying, honesty is the best policy. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation on the interpersonal deception theory. Again, my name is Taniqua, and God bless you.